We looked at some examples of looking looking at these stories in light of the house of David, and we trying to continue with that, trying to summarize. Won't go into details or looking at all the stories, but what I can go to is the book of Samuel. Finally, David is appointed and anointed as a king, um, and then the story of kingship in Israel continues. Yes, there was Saul. Saul was a king that the people wanted, and God gave them what they wanted, kind of as a rebuke on what they wanted, king like other nations. But David seems to be in God's plan to be the king who leads Israel, the king who reflects the image of God, or the image of God will be restored through this line of David. Now you have in 2 Samuel 7, whereby God makes a covenant with David, with the house of David, and it gives hope to the people that from this line there will be someone who will come, and that person will be restoring the presence of God among humanity. Now, just touching on the prophets, they talk about the day of the Lord. Some of the prophets, they talk more about the day of the Lord, the day that is coming. It looks like when you look at this day of the Lord, it has some few aspects that one can observe. One, when the day of the Lord comes, the enemies of Israel will be destroyed. Two, God will rule Israel through his Davidic king. Three, all nations, which is those who wants to associate them with the God of Israel, will come to Zion, or will come to Jerusalem under this rule and leadership of the Davidic king. So it looks like the day of the Lord has those aspects. It looks like the prophets were always looking forward to a Davidic king, even if they thought that this person will be in their generation. You had kings like King Hezekiah, who was the greatest in Judah. Probably some thought that through Hezekiah, God will establish his rule through him, and other nations will come to Jerusalem under the rule of God through this Davidic king. And when you look, maybe for example, in books like Isaiah, you can see the difference with Isaiah from other prophets is that other prophets are talking more about this Davidic king, but with Isaiah, he associates this Davidic king with Israel as the ideal Israel. For example, you have from Isaiah 40 to 55, you have some passages that are called servant songs, and they can be confusing.
It's 5 hours.
They talk about Israel as a nation, Israel that is blind, that has become wicked, but at the same time they talk about another Israel as an individual person, as the Son of God, the one who will die in the place of Israel. So you have two Israel: ethnic Israel that has become wicked, and you have ideal Israel, the ideal Israel, this particular individual who embodies Israel and he dies in the place of Israel. And you get that from Isaiah 53. And it looks like Isaiah is taking a particular king from the Davidic line, and during that time, this king would probably be Hezekiah, as I said, and he is seen as this king from the Davidic line who will be the ideal Israel and die in the place of Israel to save Israel. And this kept being the hope of Israel, looking forward to this particular person. So even when you read the prophets, you read them in light of this house of David, because they talk about the day of the Lord. They rebuke the northern Israel for not being loyal to the house of David, and to not being loyal to God, in fact, because God had appointed the house of David so that all the tribes will come and worship in Judah, in the temple in Jerusalem, and will be led by a Davidic son. And now you get to the New Testament, introducing Christ. Remember, in his baptism, when John the Baptist was baptizing Jesus, God says, "This is my son, on whom I am pleased." And it looks like John is using some Isaianic passages about the seventh song, whereby Israel is described as the servant of God, whom God has delight on. Amazingly, when you look at those seven songs, maybe Isaiah 42 verse 1, in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it will say, "This is my child," or "This is my boy child, Israel, on whom I take delight." So it looks like Matthew is looking at Isaiah and connecting this servant who was the king, a Davidic king, in the time of the Old Testament in Judah, and connecting him with Christ and saying, this is the Son of God that God has been looking forward to. In fact, this is Israel. This is the ideal Israel. Remember, the story, the major story is about the last holiday in Genesis chapter 37. The major heading is Israel, but it narrows its focus to Judah. And Judah becomes to David, and David becomes that ideal Israel according to Isaiah. And in other words, he comes in the place of Israel and he dies in the place of Israel in order to restore Israel to the image of God, that sonship, that relationship that God wanted in the beginning. And by restoring humanity back to that image of God, then God establishes his presence and he resides with us as his children through this Davidic son, which is Christ. So even when you look in the New Testament, it looks like it's looking at the Old Testament. It's looking at this Davidic king or this house of David and saying, Jesus is the one who comes from the line of David. Jesus is the Son of God. He is the image of God. Remember, the image of God was Adam, and the concept of an image has sonship connotations with it or denotations with it. It's associated with kingship, being the sons of the gods. And humanity was seen as the sons of God. And Israel is my son, is seen as the son of God, but they all failed. And God is saying, through this one son from the house of David, we see the ideal Israel. And that ideal Israel has to die for the nation Israel. And the day of the Lord comes because God now rules through this Davidic son, and all nations come to the worship of God through him. And this is what happened on the cross as we're leading to the cross. Christ dying for humanity. Because remember, the story was not about Israel. It begins with humanity, but it ends with Israel, and then focusing on David as the one who will restore humanity, because even Israel cannot restore humanity. It needs one individual from the house of David, who is the ideal Israel, according to Isaiah 53. And this particular individual, he restores humanity, that relationship, and God resides with humanity, or he establishes his presence with humanity. And we see this concept that when you believe in Jesus, then we become his children. We are his sons and daughters. We are his temple. Remember that the temple theology, God establishing his presence, it was not about the building, it was about God residing with men and establishing a relationship with them. Now, God is with us because of Christ. And we are looking forward to the future when God will be among men, will be, his presence will be with us, and we will be called the sons of God. That's where the story was leading to. That's what, this is what the purpose of these videos was about, to show you this one storyline in the house of David at the center of the story. Of course, when you look in the Old Testament, we won't say Christ maybe is at the center, or say the house of David, because this will be shown or fulfilled now, or completed fully in the New Testament when Christ comes, and it shows that all along the story was leading up to Christ as that Davidic son who restores humanity in the image of God. I thank you for your time, for listening in these videos. I hope they help you to get some understanding of the whole story of the Bible, although we couldn't look at all the details, but I'm sure people will get an idea of what we are trying to do, and what this story, what God was trying to do throughout history, through this story of the house of David, through this story of Christ. And the Easter conference is about that. It's reflecting on this whole story that began in Genesis and culminated in Christ being on the cross. Thank you.